Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at illustration rares under $10. Now there are a lot of cards really exploding in value right now, particularly as we literally saw at the top of TCG Player. There's this entire section about Drowsy's sort of price growth and how it's really ridiculous and things are not really as straightforward as it appears. Sometimes when you're looking at prices on TCG Player, I've mentioned it before how in certain cases with cards there are just these huge buyouts and ridiculous sort of sales that happen that are way above market price that kind of drive the cards up, so forth. And so it's kind of hard to tell what card should we get, what card should we not. Should we spend hundreds of dollars on special illustration rares? Are those the only cards that are really worth it? So I just thought, you know what, there are a lot of cards that people don't really talk about that often. I wanted to really shed some light on them. There's some really great ones here. I got way more than I think more than 15 cards lined up right now today. Some really solid ones. So let's get into today's video. Starting off, we have Squavit, and it's going to go from least expensive to most expensive in today's video, and we're also going to cap it at anything under $11, so like $10.79 or something like that. That'll count in part of the sort of $10 price barrier. So first up, we have this card from Scarlet and Violet base, and it's the Squavit. And what's really fun about this card is I really love the lighting in this one. It's a really chill and sort of relaxed card aesthetic, and of course, like, there's not a lot happening in it. It's just a regular living room, and then we have a Squavit chilling, and then there's just this wonderful way the lighting kind of falls on Squavit and highlights it particularly in this card. Really simple, really clean one, and I genuinely enjoy this card a lot in my binder. Like, I have the Japanese version of this, for instance, and it's really vibrant, really nice, and it's pretty solid pricing as well. Over the past year, it was at a high of $5.20, dropped back down to, I want to say, under $2, so $1.97, and has gone back up to $4.19. Still hasn't surpassed that previous high, but definitely a great artwork and pretty solid whenever you're getting illustration rares particularly, and they are at a low price. You have very little downside with this. Like, for instance, if you got, I don't know, 4 or 5 of one of the cards that I'm mentioning in this video, one of them particularly resonates with you or you truly believe in it. I'm not suggesting this to get every single one of these cards, right? Pick and choose from this list. Find the ones that you believe in, which you'd really enjoy. And so if you want to get a few of each, or each of those ones, or maybe just one of each, if they go down, maybe even if they go down $5, you lost $5 on that card. Whereas they can go up and there's just infinite upside, right? I mean, the ceiling for illustration rares, apart from the Magikarp, we saw a few already hit $100 for the Eevee and Groudon, and generally, you definitely have some upside with even some of them having the potential to go to like 20 or even more, depending on what the Pokemon or what the card is that we're seeing later in this list. I think this is a really simple, nice card. I'm not going to say this is going to become a hugely expensive card, but it's definitely a solid one to having a collection. Add some variety into that sort of collection illustration because it's just really beautiful. Next up, we have the Clauncher, and there's some people who collect just underwater cards, and so I wanted to mention this one right here. Although I don't do that necessarily, I really do enjoy underwater cards, and whenever I come across them, I do pick them up. This is the Clauncher with Skrelp in the background. We have all this sort of underwater plants, and what I would assume is some of it is kelp as well. Really a pretty solid artwork. And this card has grown quite a lot over the past 6 months. Even if we go back a year, we see that it was going for really $1.89 for a long time. Started to go up to about $3 right here, and then it really took off. This is a little bit suspect for sure, the card jumping so much, but I still think that $5.82 is still reasonable for this artwork and for this card. This is a price that maybe this card should have been at. If we take a look at the recent sales, I didn't really see anything suggesting sort of $20 or $15 sales happening with this card that would drive the price up. It was almost like a natural gradual rise. So as you can see right here, we're not really seeing those humongous ones. It's more of a gradual rise in its price. But regardless, pretty solid artwork. Next up, we have the Iron Moth. This is one of those Paradox Pokemon. One of the Pokemon you'll come across in Scarlet and Violet, in particular the Violet iteration of the game, where you get all the futuristic Pokemon, futuristic Paradox Pokemon, Miraidon, and so forth. This is really a nice artwork, predominantly because of the background. I think it's really nice, the galaxy pattern and how Iron Moth kind of shines along the lines of that futuristic vibe, like the Aurora Borealis. And this is basically a futuristic Volcarona as well. Again, definitely some growth happening here, but we see that if we look at exactly a year ago, it's going for $4.78, and it's kind of hit $5.93 now, so not a huge gap in terms of that. It just went down and sort of has these random spikes There was this one for 64 sales, and then recently there's been a lot of activity. Taking a look at recent sales, we see $6 for 20. There were 5 sales here. Tons and tons of sales, going around $5. A few at 10, which is kind of weird. But, generally we're seeing it go for less than market value, which is a possibility that might drop a little bit. But regardless, this is a really nice artwork for $5.93. Next up, we have Palafin, and I think this is a really solid artwork because there's so much happening in it. And we actually got a dolphin Pokemon finally. I've been waiting for one for a while. I absolutely adore dolphins, and particularly Finizen is such a cute Pokemon. Particularly, I like this card because of the Finizen. There are literally 5 here. One of my preferred Pokemon from Scarlet and Violet. I don't have too many I really like from this generation in terms of the new Pokemon introduced, and a very vibrant card as well because there's a lot of blues in there. But regardless, taking a look at the price, we see some sales under market value right here. We see a decent number going for above, and then we have like $6.99, $6.99, $9.98. So this card seems to be going on the rise. Huge jump all of a sudden though, so I'd be wary. This card could be getting some like hype boosting for whatever reasons, but it was consistently generally going for $5 or under $6.50 at least. Got to keep an eye on this card and see what happens with it, but 261% growth over the past 3 months. Next up, we have the Grafefe, and I really picked up this card as a sort of addition to this list because it actually has a lot of reminiscent factors to the Greninja. That artwork is pretty loved, but not necessarily by everyone. Some people feel like it's a little colorful and a little bit chaotic, but almost everyone loves the fact that Greninja is actually featured in an SIR. Now, for those who actually enjoy the Greninja's art style particularly, this could definitely be a nice complementary card to keep in that same page and in your sort of collection. Definitely one that I wouldn't say is for the Pokemon necessarily, but rather for the art style that's happening. Currently going for $6.59, and over the past year, 100% growth, and of course we have to always see this huge jump, $4 all the way up to $6.74. So also one more thing is, bear in mind that a lot of these cards are starting to get inflated in value, but the reason I wanted to show under 10 is again that the fact that there's less downside there even if it starts to drop. Next up, we have the Wiglet. This is a nice card for the fact that there's so many Pokemon in this. We have Skrelp, Love-Disc, we have a Moraine, and even a really cute Psyduck and a Slowpoke, if y'all see that back there. And then we also have a Shelter. There are a lot of people who just collect Psyduck and Slowpoke cards, so this is one that could be added to those people's binders. And also I really again love the water card, so I personally have this in Japanese. Really nice artwork, and it's been growing more gradually than a lot of the cards that we saw. Its massive jump was only from 586 to 692. Next we have the Raboot, and this is quite a nice artwork. Personally, I didn't like the card when I first saw it because the images were actually really bad of the card, but in person it's actually fairly nice. The images that I saw initially made this card out to be super faded, and you could barely even see the artworks when I saw it. But when I saw it in person, it was actually quite solid. Not too much fading. We actually have a decent amount of color and outline to actually make out Raboot. And it is, of course, a middle evolution, so I genuinely have the sentiment that whenever you have a starter Pokemon line, people can have some attachment to it because they see it in the show. It was Go's partner, after all, in Master Journey and that whole series. For anyone who played the Sword and Shield games, it was one of the starters, so you might have had a sentiment attached because you played Cinderace and all the way. So naturally, I generally have a feeling that people, if it's part of the starter lines, there is a certain amount of weightage that carries on its own. And then the artwork is quite nice and complimentary of Raboot's general kicking style, where there's a whole segment dedicated to the fact that Go's Scorbunny couldn't use Ember, and so it had to keep kicking this rock up again and again until it finally learned how to use sort of Ember with Go's sort of recommendations and their sort of partnership evolving and growing in that episode. And then it evolves into Raboot, so sort of rock kicking Ember continues to stay at that point. This is pretty much pre-release, so I'd ignore this. Starting over here, $4, and it's been growing gradually up to $7.20. I don't see that huge spike happening in this card, which is a really nice thing to notice. And then also when the card is having a more gradual uptake, that's also another positive sign for genuine intrinsic valuation by the market. Next, we have King Gambit, and this is a card that honestly I can't believe it's still $8. It's one that's been so beautiful. I mean, it's from base set. It's one that I've really been like wondering how come people haven't picked this up more. It's really solid artwork. The entire evolution line here. King Gambit was a new evolution that was provided to this Scarlet Valley era for Bisharp. We had Bisharp since Black and White, and now we got its evolution. And I actually played it in the game for Scarlet. It was a really solid addition. And so we also see that over the past year, at least, taking a look at it, it went from 451, kind of maintained price around that range, and then about December start to take off the price for this card. I do feel like this is a really nice long-term, hold in terms of arts. This is definitely a unique one and has a very nice army style to it. Next up we have Pheasantipede, and this is a card that I genuinely believe is quite undervalued. Pheasantipede is definitely the better Pokemon of the sort of DLC. Like Ogerpon, Okidoki, Monkey Dory, don't really care for any of those to be honest. But Pheasantipede is a really solid artwork. I like the ninja style bird. This card's been rising for some time now, so if we take a look from December, it's been rising and sort of cooling down now. Taking a look at recent sales, we see that it's kind of maintaining a price right now, sticking around that $9 range. It's not really having huge jumps since about late January, so it's maintained this price relatively for about a month now, almost a month. So pretty solid artwork though, and definitely I think this is way better than the SIR from Shrouded Fable. Next up is Shiftry, and I actually made a short on this card a few days ago, I think. Really great artwork. Shiftry's a pretty old Pokemon as well. It was Gen 3. There was an entire episode I remember when it was dedicated to Nurse Joy going missing from the Pokemon Center, and Ash and his team were trying to find out what happened to her. It turns out the Shiftry actually took her to sort of help care for some injured Pokemon in the forest, and it's kind of like a forest guardian in another sense, not like Celebi necessarily because it's not a legendary, but a regular Pokemon that sort of takes care of the forest. I really like that element to it. And if we take a look at the near mint sales, we see that over the past year, we see it's gone from like a low of $2.37 all the way up to about $5.48. And then it took off a little bit more, gaining about $4 since that sort of high period hit, which is about, I would say, most of the illustration were really hit during middle to late December, and then some of them were hit during middle January. But generally speaking, I genuinely think this is a long-term, a great artwork and great card to have in your binder. Definitely some potential for growth there as well. Next up we have the Fiona, and this is again for those people who love collecting the underwater cards. And again, mythical Pokemon, so there is that factor to add to this. Gen 4 Pokemon. We have a bunch of Wailmer and Wailord, and it's really nice how they're kind of faded in the background, yet they're so distinct as well. Like the way they use the highlights on top of the Wailord's body and the Wailmer's body to sort of highlight them. Again, the lighting's working really well to sort of highlight Fiona particularly in this card. I picked it up in English actually quite recently, and it's been growing, so it's pretty nice to see that. I feel like $9 is reasonable enough for this card. Next up is Braviary, and I think this is just crazy undervalued for what it is. One of the best sort of bird Pokemon in the entire sort of series, I think. And it's just, it was sitting at $4 for a long time. I genuinely thought this card would debut at like $15. I picked it up, I pulled it in Japanese, and it's been growing quite consistently now. After that $4, it's just been taking off, and quite reasonably, honestly. I think this card being $10 is still ridiculous. The Skarmory and this card are really solid. There are a lot of nice sort of art styles that are explored in Surging Sparks, and this has a very nice Van Gogh aesthetic to it, which, we have the Van Gogh Pikachu, and of course, like, some of those artworks from, Sun and Moon, like the Screaming Pikachu and so forth. They all take this sort of style, but not many cards have it, so I think it's very unique. Next up we have Crocodile. Now this is a card that I feel like fits in for multiple reasons into this list. So really nice vibrant colors on it. Starter, middle evolution, but also Paldea Evolve features lines for every single starter Pokemon. So we have the Fuecoco, we have the Skeletors, and we have the Crocodile sort of in a line. And naturally, if you have the Skeletors or the Fuecoco, you'll want to probably collect the full line because those are the two more expensive ones. Crazy enough, Fuecoco is more expensive than the SIR Skeletors. I really love the SIR Skeletors. That's a great card. And for anyone who wants to collect the line because they played the game, maybe they used Fuecoco, which I did. I mean, I'd say a lot of people use fire types, generally speaking. So you might have connections to that. Maybe you like Pokemon Horizon and watch Roy, and maybe you particularly like Fuecoco for that reason and its line. So there are multiple reasons, mostly driven by the sort of peripheral cards to Crocolar that I mentioned this in the list. Next up, we have Omnite. Now, this is because it's in 151, really. It's a really solid artwork. Tons of extinct Pokemon. Perhaps not the best one in 151, if I'm being honest, but there's definitely growth potential here for the fact that's in 151, one of the most iconic sets. Definitely a long-term, a great set to hold, and it's really crazy, honestly, that this card is only $10. Because it's a pretty solid one. We have some Kabuto, we have Amistar, some Ammonite here, and it almost looks like the ancient underwater setting, which really fits to what these Pokemon are. As we see, it has grown substantially. If we look at the past year, it's had some spikes, but relatively stays at $5. That's sort of median line for it. And then if we go up from December, it's grown all the way by $10. Partly also because of 151 being out of stock everywhere, even before a lot of the other sets were kind of being gobbled up by the market. 151 was just really one of those first sets that we saw people kind of fighting over in Costco, for instance, for the mini tins. Now for Blooming Waters, as far as I'm aware, this is the last product that we've seen or at least got an announcement of. We've had 151 out for a while now. There's no guarantees of any reprints or less of a probability per se, especially with the focus shifting towards the next sets that are coming up. Reprints for sets like Surging Sparks and so forth, which a lot of people didn't even get the chance to open, a single pack of. So there is that factor to consider for 151. Maybe we might not get much of a re-exploration in terms of reprints. So as sealed starts to get more scarce, less is being opened up, naturally the singles will start to rise in value. Next up, we have this Paldean Tauros, and honestly, this is such a great artwork. Ash has a huge horde of Tauros. I think he caught a ton in one of the earlier seasons. I want to say Gen 2, I believe it was Gen 2 after the Orange Islands, and so he got tons of these Tauros, and so these are Paldean Tauros, so they have the black coloring instead of the brown, and again, lighting. I mean, I don't know what they're doing in Scarlet Valley, but they do a great job with lighting in this. The way that all the Pokemon generally, even if it's underwater, they're just illuminated really nicely, and adding those sort of streaks of light that are kind of penetrating through the fur or kind of around Tauros really makes for a nice aesthetic artwork. And this actually reminds me of a Lion King scene, that moment where there's that huge stampede of wildebeest. Second last, we have the Gimmighoul, and this is mostly because of what we see in the background. That's actually the evolution Goldango, and so obviously these cards, when I always say that story cards are so fascinating, so exciting to have in Scarlet Valley, and so having the connected artworks and collecting them, especially when people are really acknowledging or valuing those as much as one would expect, I think that this is a really great card to have, particularly for that connected piece. The Goldango is not crazy expensive either. It's under 25 last I checked. So they have a vertical connection here where Goldango is on top and then Gimmighoul is underneath. And this is a Pokemon that sort of hoards gold. And so we see that with all the coins sort of stacked around. Finally, we have Tangela, and all the things that I said to the Omnite kind of apply here. Definitely such a great artwork for Tangela. Really simplistic. I like this almost sketching art style to this, where it almost looks like someone took their pencil, sort of sketched in the artwork and decided to sort of fill in the art, and looks really great. Tangela, actually recently, I pulled this in December or so, because I needed this card for my master set. Still have 5 cards that I'm missing for 151. Still got a truck on that, but definitely a great card, and it's going up, but more gradually. We see it going from, in the past 6 months, from 574 all the way to 1095, so almost doubling there, and it's been quite gradual, and so always a positive sign for cards. But yeah, that'll do it for today. Hope this video gave some ideas as to the types of cards that you can definitely pick up still for reasonable prices, even though they are going up to some extent. The downside being much lower. You don't have to worry too much comparatively when you get this card compared to if you got something like Milotic SIR, for instance, or Hydreigon SIR, for instance, from Surging Sparks. There's so much more downside for cards like that if the market ever popped, and that will happen at some point, whether we don't know when that'll happen. I don't foresee that happening for a while, to be honest. When you get cards for lower, and that's something I tend to try and do, get cards when they're lower and then see them grow more so, or at least stay at the same rate, rather than get cards that are blowing up. And definitely don't FOMO for like cards like the Drowsy. I made a video where I was talking about illustration works that are really blasting up in price, and so you don't have to go and grab those cards necessarily. There are some great ones out there. But yeah, that'll do it for today. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and let me know what you'd like to see next in the comments down below, and I'll catch you all in the next one.